If you don't know where you are going, know where you come from. If you do not know where you are going, know where you come from. Now, this proverb has been said probably in many ways across many cultures, but the one that I want to spotlight today is used by the Gullah Geechee people, an Afro-American ethnic group just west of here, whose footprint stretches from roughly Wilmington, North Carolina, down to Jacksonville, Florida. And the significance of this quote is really at the heart of what I want to talk about today, about how cultural narratives, particularly in my case, Afro-American cultural narratives, rooted in optimism, tenacity, accountability, and altruism, despite what seems insurmountable odds, can inspire all of us to reach our highest potential, and most importantly, to pay it forward. So just a quick introduction. Hi, my name is Dale. Hello, everybody. And I am a senior strategy and operations manager for a very large payment processor. Before that, I wrote software, mainly in the business intelligence and machine learning spaces. And I dabbled a little bit in tech entrepreneurship with varying degrees of success. But in my spare time, I play polo. Yes, like on horses. And I also train horses, and also another big interest of mine is learning and understanding history. And as I've gotten older, understanding my own family's history and how it ties and interconnects with the overall sort of African diaspora, and particularly the Afro-American experience. Okay, so since this is really more or less a conversation about how, our cultural narratives can drive really sort of unconventional results, I thought that we should kind of open things up with a really unconventional story. So, okay, let's paint the scene. It's 2017, and I'm on a business trip in Buenos Aires. And in my free time, I like to explore the city. If you've ever been, it's an amazingly beautiful city. And so I decide to walk into a leather goods shop to grab gifts for my mother. And when I walk in there, everything is just absolutely beautiful. But what is most striking is a pair of boots on a top shelf. And I look over at the shopkeep and I ask him, are these equestrian boots? Are these boots for polo? And he said, yeah, they're for polo. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go home and I'm going to go do that. And as simple as that, I started playing polo. That was it. Fast forward a few years later, and you can say that I've actually found pretty decent success in the polo space. From that, I have taken and leveraged this opportunity to work with children, to start to teach them about empathy and leadership with horses. And I've also begun to work with children from my own community, Oakland, California, and preparing them for equestrian shows and things of that nature, things that a lot of these young people have never experienced before. And it would seem rather unlikely that a person like me, an Afro-American man from a neighborhood called, or referred to as deep East Oakland, California, would ever achieve success in the tech space or play polo. And to make that a little bit more clear, I wanted to pull up a 1991 Los Angeles Times article that really talked about my neighborhood. And why I pulled 1991 was I was about 5 years old at the time. And really the discussion in this article was saying basically people from my neighborhood, the outcomes were not promising. And so when we have this conversation today, it forced me to really think what made my situation, what made my results so different. I would often get, coming up, when I moved through university and a pretty decent high school and whatnot, you come from this place. Why and how could it be so different for you? And I never saw a contradiction from where I'd come from. But the questions made a lot of sense. They were warranted. And so I really started to look into why there was this difference there. And more or less, when I began to double click into why, I found that it was more or less not where I came from, but who I came from. So I grew up in a family that upholds a Afro-American tradition of more or less, I would argue, ancestor veneration. And this is a practice that's really more or less done throughout the African diaspora. We've really recently come back from Senegal, wherever you travel in the United States, and in just different parts throughout the diaspora, you'll find people who really tend to honor their ancestors, and it's probably one of these leftover vestiges from, the movement of people throughout the world. And what I've found basically in sort of this ancestor veneration, if you will, are several key themes that, really have helped me sort of unlock potential and leadership potential and greatness and so forth. And so these are the three recurring themes that I've found to actually have guided my life. And when I listened to these stories through my family, these just kept coming up. When you stripped everything away, it was education, it was boldness, perseverance, vision, innovation, and selflessness. So today, I thought we would move forward with the conversation by allowing you all to participate in this time-honored tradition. Today, like when I was a young kid, if you will, and I had an elder and they'd tell me a bunch of stories and try to, impart to me the wisdom of that story. Today, I'll act as storyteller, and you will all be the participants in this tradition. And what we will do is we will go through ancestral stories supported by a number of photos and documents, happily provided by my parents. And we will work through them so that we can just understand each one in a little more depth. Education. And I'll point out some of the pictures here. So this is a picture of my grandmother's segregated class in the 1930s. Both my grandparents ended up going to segregated high schools, elementary schools, and even colleges. They attended school at a time when, unfortunately, Afro-Americans were not allowed to go to school with any other groups of people. I'll start with a story. In 2008, my grandfather was admitted to the Veterans Hospital in San Francisco, California. And this was right before I went ahead to earn one of my second degree. And unfortunately, he was too ill to attend the commencement. But afterward, I took him the program flyer and was happy to point out that behind his grandson's name, there were 2 plus signs, which basically meant that I'd earned a double diploma. And when I had spoken to his caretaker said, your grandfather would literally take this program flyer everywhere with him. He took it to his doctor's appointment. He took it to lunch. And when he left this world, it was by him. Why? Because my grandfather understood very much so that education changes lives. It really allows those folks, at least in the experience of my family, to have overcome so much adversity and give them hope. And so I think of 2 other stories that kind of were imparted to me. And the first one was my great-grandfather by the name of James Ivan Moore, who attended the Negro College at Wilberforce in Ohio. And with his education, he was empowered to return to his native Guelph, Canada, or Toronto, Canada. And he was able to organize Black or Afro-Canadian rail car porters for higher wages. Similarly, my grandmother, who is in this photo, grew up as a sharecropper on a cotton plantation. And she was able to transcend her circumstances by earning a master's degree and being able to take that back and teach school children in some of Oakland's toughest neighborhoods. And what education allows us to do, as I'm sure most of us know, is it allows us to take and impart more knowledge and more wisdom to other people in a positive way. It compounds, and in fact, it even transcends lifetime. Boldness. I don't think there's anyone that exudes exceptional boldness more than my fourth great-grandmother, Mary Todd Johnson. She was born in Virginia, a slave. She ran away to New York. She married a free man of color. And at the outset of the Civil War, she covertly returned to Virginia to supply information to the Union Army. And when I think about Mary Todd and her husband, I often think about the conversations between this husband and wife, what would she say to her husband? Babe, I'm going back to Virginia. I could only imagine at that time, maybe how progressive that relationship could have been. But that's what she did. And she rendered just unlimited service that led to, obviously, the end of one of my nations, because I realize I'm in a different place. I would say our nations in my speech, but my nation's bloodiest conflict, and the freedom of 4 million Afro-Americans. And what boldness means is to take those risks. We as leaders, we as world citizens, this is something that is demanded of us. And some of us are not necessarily bold. It doesn't come as second nature. That's me, 100%. Definitely a very risk-averse person. So when I think back to this story, I think to, how do we take those risks? What are those things that we can do? Because as a leader, it's going to come up undeniably. Whether it's executing a strategy and sticking with it, whether it's putting our reputation on the line for something that we believe in, boldness is key. Perseverance. In 1911, Floyd Wilson, a disgruntled boarder at my second great-grandmother Clara Alexander's boarding house, took a blade to her face, permanently disfiguring her. You can probably see it there in the picture. Despite this really difficult circumstance, Clara persevered. She was able to continue running her business. She bought this beautiful Victorian home on Owego, New York's picturesque Main Street. And then on all of these other pictures, which I didn't include, she wore fabulous fur coats, I think is a sign of her prosperity. And she also went on to raise my great-grandmother, Beatrice Alexander, who became the first Black woman assembly page for the state of New Jersey. Clara really wasn't a woman that you could ever hold down. She persevered. And what I've come to realize through her story is that through perseverance, we have to continue to push through no matter what. As leaders, there are going to come those moments in which life knocks us down, but we can't quit. Sometimes it'll wear us out. Sometimes it will disfigure us, like in the case of Clara. But ultimately, we cannot allow the Floyd Wilsons of the world to win. We have to continue to show up. Vision. So I think throughout the African diaspora, but particularly in the Afro-American diaspora, so many of us stand really on the work and the efforts of those people who have come before. This right here is the voter roll for my second great-grandfather, Charles Johnson. He was the first person in my family to vote. And we just finished an election in the United States. And regardless of the outcome, I have to say that I was the first generation, because it definitely wasn't my parents, they were in the 50s and 60s. But I was the first generation, at least in my family, to vote without any type of intimidation or voter suppression, unlike Charles, who unfortunately faced intimidation and threat of death. However, these ancestors had a vision for themselves and for their descendants that they would one day be able to participate in a free republic. And so as leaders, we have to be the same way. We have to look at something greater than ourselves. We have to look at the future despite the odds and hope for a better tomorrow. And that's what really more or less Charles did, and that's why I'm able to more or less stand here today. Innovation. Innovation, we can't continue to do the same things and expect a different result. My grandfather, pictured here, grew up on a ranch in East Central Texas. And he decided not to go the way of his father and grandfather, to be cattle ranchers. And in fact, my grandfather raised horses, so that kind of full circle to the horse thing. He raised horses, but he decided not to do that. He decided to go to university. He served as a corporal in the Second World War, and he moved to California, where he became a celebrated entrepreneur and community leader. And what his story demonstrates is that we always have to be ever changing, ever evolving. It's the only way that we can really grow as leaders and move the world forward. We can't rest on our laurels, and we can't be complacent. We can't just say, hey, I'm gonna just stay here on the ranch and chill out and ride horses all day. I would love that. That would be an ideal life for me. But in real life, we gotta keep moving forward. So, and selflessness. None of these other themes work if we're not selfless. And I'm sure there are plenty of stories where individuals have achieved so-called greatness, and they haven't made much impact on the world. Therefore, I think selflessness actually ties all of these together. The work that all of these people had done was not ever for themselves. It was for their families. It was for their communities. And so as leaders, this is something that we always need to understand. Our role really is more or less to serve others, and it is our duty and it is our calling. And so really what I'm asking everyone here to do today is to think about these themes and think about, as leaders and world citizens, how do you apply them to your own lives? Or can you explore the narratives in your own experience? So, yeah, thank you.